You know, the one good thing about being quarantined is you do get a lot of time to catch up on your backlog of comics, which I have been doing. I finally read Shredder in Hell, which was awesome. I'm currently reading Nick Spencer's Spider-Man run, which I'm really digging. And next, I think I'll jump into something like Surgeon X or Robin Year One. It is his 80th anniversary after all. Or hell, maybe I'll finally bite the bullet and read One Piece. But that's a hard maybe. But before I get to any of those, I decided to read Superman Red Sun first. This has been sitting in my Comixology backlog for quite a while now, along with a whole lot of other comics, but I decided to check this one out because A, I really can't do anything else right now, and B, there's a brand new animated adaptation of this story from the people who do all of the other direct-to-video DC animated movies. And since there's literally nothing else going on right now, I figure it'd be a good time to check out both the comic and the animated version of Superman Red Sun and see whether or not it's worth your time. I almost forgot to mention, there will be spoilers in this video for Red Sun, the comic, and the movie, so just saying that now before you all yell at me and stuff. On with the show. Superman Red Sun is a 2003 Elseworlds title written by Mark Millar and illustrated by Dave Johnson, Killian Plunkett, Andrew Robinson, and Walden Wong. Elseworlds, for those of you who may need a refresher, was DC's sub-label of comics, which featured all of their popular characters in stories that took place outside of the mainstream continuity. This is where you got things like what if Batman was a vampire? Or what if Wonder Woman was a cowboy? Now, Superman Red Sun, which I believe was the last official Elseworlds title, or at least the last one of the original run, does follow in the same vein by offering this what if scenario. What if the rocket carrying baby Kal-El to Earth landed in Soviet Russia rather than the good old US of A? Now, that premise is interesting on its own, but when you read the story, you realize that this isn't necessarily just a palette swap version of a traditional Superman story where you take the regular characters and just put them in Russia. Instead, this comic actually looks at what might happen to the world if a totalitarian regime like the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin got their hands on one of the most powerful beings in existence. And Millar and Co. do a great job of showing just what that could look like. The Soviet Union uses Superman to become the dominant country in the world. This in turn causes the United States to go into panic mode and look for any and all solutions to try and combat this potential threat to the country. And then this leads to some really interesting takes on characters we all know and love. Lex Luthor is still a jealous lunatic driven to defeat Superman, but now the stakes are much higher because his government actively wants him to help. This leads to the creation of classic Superman villains like Bizarro and Parasite, each with their own unique twists. We get to see new versions of characters like Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen. Characters closely associated to Superman's origin like Pete Ross and Lana Lang are present here, but retrofitted to fit this new Russian-based status quo. Even some of the other DC heroes appear in this story with their own unique makeover. We got a new interesting take on Wonder Woman, the Green Lantern Corps appears in a new way, and we even get Soviet Batman complete with a nifty little hat. It's all interesting stuff to see, to be sure, but without a doubt, the most interesting thing about Superman Red Sun is just what the creative team actually did to Superman himself. Gone is the typical bright and cheery do-gooder. In his place is a much darker, more militant figure. He's very much a product of his upbringing. Raised by the Soviet state, this man is dedicated to the ideals of the Soviet Union. He'll do anything for his country, even taking over as leader after Stalin dies. His methods are extreme and jarring. It's shocking to see such an icon of the superhero genre do things like watch over the world with Big Brother-like security, or lobotomize his dissenters who think of questioning his reign. And yet despite this, he's still trying to be a good person. He's still trying to save people and protect the world from those who would do harm to it. In the beginning of the story, he even goes out of his way to save the people of the United States and continues to help all over the globe, despite his duties to Mother Russia. And by the end of the story, when he's fully taken over the world, he doesn't do it for power or greed, but just because he thinks it's the right thing to do. It's a fascinating disconnect between the ideas of nature and nurture. The nature of Superman is to help, save, and protect people at all costs, but the nurturing of the Soviet Union setting makes him emphasize power and strength over everything else. It's very fascinating to see. Now, if the name Mark Millar sounds familiar to you, it really should. This is a guy best known for more indie work like Wanted, Kick-Ass, The Secret Service, which would eventually become known as The Kingsman. Now, I've said before that I'm not exactly the biggest fan of Mark Millar. I find a lot of his most successful work to be very dude bro oriented, focusing a lot on hyper violence and unnecessary swearing in order to sell a concept that's honestly been done before. Also, I only think he's in the comics game in order to weasel his way into Hollywood, but that's another topic for another time. Anyway, I may not be the biggest fan of his work, but I do recognize game when I see it, and Superman Red Son is a damn good comic book. I don't often recommend Elseworlds or alt-reality stories when I recommend comics, especially superhero comics, but Superman Red Son is one of the very few exceptions. It's a great showcase for not just what an alternate history version of Superman might look like, but it also shows just how powerful the idea of Superman is. It's the type of Superman story that can easily go on to influence future Superman stories and not just in the realm of comics. We've seen Superman Red Son skin show up in video games like Injustice and Arkham Origins. The CW Supergirl show used elements from Red Son in its 4th season, particularly with the introduction of the Red Daughter character. They even made a motion comic out of Superman Red Son. It's on YouTube if you want to watch it. It's odd. I've always found the motion comics to be a little bit weird in nature. It's just me. And now Superman Red Son has a fancy direct-to-video DC Universe animated adaptation. Now, just because it got this animated adaptation treatment doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna be a good movie. The direct-to-video DC Universe films are pretty hit and miss. Some are very good, some are not. Last year, we looked at the Hush adaptation and found it to be very much in the not so good category. Well, luckily, having just watched Red Son, I can easily say that it can fit in the good category. It's not the best DC Universe animated film, but it adapts the story very well and is able to stand on its own 2 feet as a good animated movie. It's not a straight one-to-one adaptation of the comic. Certain things do get changed or omitted from the source material, some of which I do have questions about, but nothing ever feels shoehorned in or out of place. The crux of the story is intact and told with clarity. It's not as deep as the comic either. With a 90-minute runtime, it's kind of impossible for it to be. But everything that's important to the story is there, and you do believe that America's greatest hero could wind up being a Russian dominator. Now, like I said before, there are some changes to the story that I do find questionable. For example, in the comic book version of Red Son, Lex Luthor and Lois Lane are married, but it doesn't exactly seem to be a very love-filled marriage. Lex is very clearly focused on his work, and Lois is a very distant second. In the movie, however, they are very much a couple in love. Lex still focuses a lot more on his work than he does on her, but there's no sense of animosity or jealousy in their relationship. This removes that hint of the traditional Superman, Lois, and Lex dynamic that exists in the mainstream Superman stories. Probably the biggest change I have an issue with is the way Superman ascends to power in the Soviet Union. In the comics, Joseph Stalin is poisoned and killed, but Superman doesn't take power right away. He wants the natural human process to happen so that they can pick a new leader on their own. It isn't until he runs into Russian Lana Lang in a bread line starving and decides to take matters into his own hands. In the movie, however, Superman just annihilates Stalin with his heat vision after learning about a secret gulag containing people who knew about his secret identity, including Russian Lana Lang. This makes Superman's turn into true dictator a lot less shocking. It goes from being just a nice guy who slowly gets morphed and corrupted by his job and his surroundings into a guy who's had this menacing side in him the entire time. But like I said before, this is still a very good adaptation of an excellent comic book. The action scenes are very well done. The premise alone is very interesting. The voice work in this movie isn't too bad either. Jason Isaacs is a very good Superman, even employing a Russian accent that doesn't sound too fake. Diedrich Bader has an excellent turn as Lex Luthor. Vanessa Marshall has played Wonder Woman in other projects, but continues to do an excellent job here. And even with a heavy Russian accent, Roger Craig Smith gives great Batman.
Pain is a new sensation, yes? Get used to it.
The artwork and animation is still that kinda stilted animation style typical of direct-to-video animated movies, but the character designs are pretty good, and overall the film looks rather nice. I do like the way that Superman's costume does get progressively darker as the movie progresses. That's a nice touch. It is kind of a shame that they didn't incorporate more of the Russian propaganda style artwork of the opening credits scene. I wouldn't want to see a whole movie like this, but something extra in the movie would have been nice. At least I think. Overall, Superman Red Son the movie is very good. It doesn't replace the comic. In fact, I think reading the comic first actually helps improve the movie, but it's good enough to stand on its own so that you don't have to read the comic in order to enjoy it. Of course, you should read the comic book version of Superman Red Son. I mean, it is one of the best Superman stories of the past 20 years, and I'll have an Amazon affiliate link to it in the description, along with a link to the movie so that you have no excuse. What do you think about Superman Red Son? Have you read the comic before? Are you excited for the movie? Did I get you interested in the idea of a communist Superman, or are you now more hesitant to check it out than ever before? Let me know down below or anywhere on the internet. I know this movie has been out on digital for a while now, but I wanted to wait until I could get my hands on the physical copy of it because I feel like most people wait for the DVD and Blu-ray of the animated films before going out to check them out anyway, so I figured why not just wait? At least I think that's what happens. I think people wait for the physical of these films. Plus, if I get the Blu-ray, that means I can rip footage from it and use it in this video for all you guys to see. And of course, don't forget that we have new videos on this channel every single Tuesday and Wednesday, with Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern being Wulff Den Live. So subscribe to see all of that, like this video, and share it with a friend who's maybe a little sick of seeing the traditional all-American Superman and wants to see a Superman who champions the common worker. Thank you all for watching. До свидания, камера.